skirmish that started the war. Part 1. A routine survey. The RPS Vanguard cut through the cold expanse of space with quiet efficiency. Its sleek, angular frame gleamed under the distant light of stars, moving like a silent predator through the black void. Built for speed and maneuverability rather than brute force, it was the pride of the Back Republic's fleet, a ship designed for exploration, reconnaissance, and the occasional diplomatic mission, but never for combat. Captain Rena Trask stood at the observation window, watching the stars pass by. Her dark eyes, sharp with years of military service, remained fixed on the faint glow of the Tronter system ahead. It was a lonely corner of space, untouched by the Empire's conflicts, a forgotten system that hadn't been mapped in any meaningful way. Perfect spot for a routine survey. Her crew, like the ship itself, had become accustomed to the quiet rhythm of operations. It was just another day in a long stretch of unremarkable missions. Their orders were simple: enter the Tronter system, map its planets, scan for resources or signs of life, and report back to Republic Command. Nothing more, nothing less. All systems green, Captain, Lieutenant Rourke reported from his station, his voice steady as he monitored the ship's movements. Approaching the Tronter system's outer orbit. Scanners active. Captain Trask nodded, turning to face him. Proceed as planned. Begin the system scan once we clear the asteroid belt. We'll take it slow. No need to provoke anything. Standard protocol. Aye, Captain, Rourke replied, sending a series of commands to the rest of the crew. The bridge of the RPS Vanguard hummed with quiet activity as officers manned their stations, carrying out the pre-programmed tasks that would populate the sensor logs for later analysis. The ship's purpose was clear, and the crew knew their roles. Below deck, in the lower operational rooms, Ensign Vix and Sergeant Alara were busy running the ship's internal scanners. Vix, with his youthful enthusiasm, typed away at the console, eyes flicking back and forth between data streams. Alara, the more experienced officer, studied the readings with a focused expression, her eyes narrowing in concentration. Initial planetary scans show nothing unusual, Vix said, his voice soft but confident. Class M planet on the outer rim, 2 moons, some scattered debris. Nothing that stands out. Alara raised an eyebrow, leaning over to peer at the readings. Wait, there's something here, static. It's coming from the debris field, and it's different from normal interference. I don't think it's natural. Vic's fingers danced over the console, his attention sharpening. You're right. It's like a signal almost. Weak though. Run a deeper analysis, Alara instructed, tapping a few keys. Could be something old, maybe a malfunctioning relay or a leftover beacon, but it's worth checking. Got it, Vix replied, toggling through the system's diagnostic filters. Meanwhile, Captain Trask continued her quiet survey from the observation deck. She watched as the RPS Vanguard passed the outermost ring of debris, the pale light of distant stars illuminating the scattered remnants of forgotten ships. It was the kind of place most explorers avoided, a graveyard of rusting hulls and abandoned vessels that had long since been reclaimed by the void. But to her crew it was just another data point to catalog. Nothing dangerous. Just another anomaly to scan, another set of coordinates to log into the database. The silence of space seemed to stretch on forever. The RPS Vanguard was on autopilot. Familiar, predictable, efficient. But in the back of Captain Trask's mind, there was a nagging sensation. Something was off, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Her years of service had taught her to trust that gut feeling, especially in the quiet moments. Space had a way of catching you off guard. Captain, Lieutenant Rourke called out again, his voice breaking through her thoughts. We've got a faint signal coming from the third planet. It's very weak, barely above the background noise, but it's there. Trask turned toward him, eyes narrowing. What kind of signal? Rourke shook his head. Can't tell yet. It's not strong enough for a clear reading. No sign of artificial origin. Could be a natural anomaly, a fluke in the system, but I've never seen anything like it. Captain Trask took a deep breath, her mind weighing the options. A weak signal wasn't much to go on, but the fact that it was coming from a planet in an otherwise quiet system raised a flag. Could be nothing. Or it could be something they couldn't afford to ignore. "Send out a probe," she ordered, her voice calm but firm. "Run a diagnostic on that signal. I want full scans, and I want a report back in 20 minutes. "Aye, Captain," Rourke replied, already relaying the order. As the crew continued their operations, Trask stood silently by the observation window, her gaze still locked on the distant Tronter system. The routine continued. No alarms, no chaos. Just the hum of the RPS Vanguard cruising through the stars, its mission unfolding in the most predictable manner possible. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond the veil of the ordinary, waiting. The signal, the static, the debris, it was all too coincidental. She felt the weight of the decision hanging over her. Should they proceed as planned, finish the survey, and return to Republic space? Or should they dig deeper into the strange signal, risking an unknown danger? Her hand rested on the cool surface of the observation window as she pondered. The decision would come soon enough. But for now, all they could do was wait, and follow the course set for them. End of Part 1. Skirmish that started the war. Part 2. The ambush. The RPS Vanguard drifted closer to the third planet in the Tronter system, the faint signal from the surface still echoing weakly in the background. Despite her initial reservations, Captain Rena Trask had kept the course steady, trusting the competence of her crew to find the source of the anomaly. But beneath the calm routine of their operations, an unseen threat was already closing in on them. Far beyond the RPS Vanguard, hidden from the prying sensors of the back Republic, the foregone technocracy's cruiser SS Scythe lay waiting. It was a ship of dark design, its surface an irregular matte black sheen, with jagged contours and sharp angles, as though it were more weapon than vessel. The Scythe had been in the Tronter system for weeks, long before the RPS Vanguard had even begun its approach. Its mission, however, was not one of exploration or survey. It was far more sinister. Captain Varys Malin of the SS Scythe stood at the tactical station of his bridge, his eyes fixed on the blinking red lights that illuminated the dark room. His tall, angular figure cast a long shadow across the room, and his cold, calculating gaze seemed to pierce through the screens as if he were staring directly at the RPS Vanguard. He was a commander trained in the shadows, a master of subtlety and deception. The technocracy did not fight in open space like the Republic. Instead, they relied on secrecy, subterfuge, and surprise. Behind Malin, the crew of the SS Scythe moved in complete silence. They had detected the RPS Vanguard as soon as it entered the system, and now they were watching it, waiting for it to get too close. A lone survey ship in this system wasn't a threat on its own, but what they were about to discover could change everything. "The Vanguard is following the expected trajectory," Lieutenant Neris reported from her station, her voice soft but sharp. "They've launched a probe to investigate the signal on the third planet's surface." Malin's eyes flickered briefly to the sensor data. "They're curious," he murmured. "It doesn't matter." Neris hesitated before speaking again. "There's still the possibility they'll uncover the outpost, Captain. If they do." "They won't," Malin interrupted. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "If we don't act quickly, they will. And that is something we cannot allow." Malin turned to face the holomap, his mind already calculating the precise coordinates. His orders were clear. Prevent the RPS Vanguard from discovering the technocracy's secret outpost on the third planet. The outpost had been established years ago, hidden beneath the surface, and its purpose was one of great importance. But its existence, if discovered, would be catastrophic. The back Republic could not be allowed to uncover the secrets it housed. Not yet. "Prepare the strike force," Malin ordered, his voice cold. "I want the Vanguard disabled, but not destroyed. We need their data, but we cannot risk them returning to Republic space with any information. Launch on my command." "Aye, Captain," Neris replied, tapping into the ship's communication system to relay orders to the hangar. Soon, the stealthy form of the technocracy's assault craft would be ready to deploy. The SS Scythe had already moved into position, hidden just beyond the debris field. Using the asteroid belt as cover, they had been undetected by the RPS Vanguard sensors. The technocracy had become masters of operating in the shadows, and the Vanguard was too focused on the faint signal from the planet to notice the danger creeping up behind them. Aboard the RPS Vanguard, the bridge continued its quiet routine, unaware of the impending threat. Captain Trask stood by the observation window once again, her hands clasped behind her back, her mind still turning over the strange signal. Her officers were handling the investigation as best as they could, running diagnostics and trying to discern the source of the interference. But the longer they lingered near the third planet, the more Captain Trask began to feel a creeping sense of dread, as though something was quietly pressing in from all sides. The ship's sensors were continuing to scan, but Captain Trask's instincts told her to stay alert. As the Vanguard edged closer to the planet, her crew began to prepare for the next phase of the survey. "Captain," Lieutenant Rourke called from his station, his voice tense. "We're getting a strange reading. Something's shifting in the asteroid belt. It's not a natural pattern." Trask's attention snapped to him, her focus sharp. "What do you mean, Lieutenant? What are we looking at?" "It's a ship," Captain Rourke said, his voice betraying a hint of concern. "Something large coming in fast. I'm running a full analysis, but I don't think it's one of ours." Trask's stomach tightened. "Status report, Ensign Vix." "What are you seeing?" Vic's fingers were flying across his console, his brow furrowed in concentration. I'm not sure, Captain. It's too small to be a cruiser, but it's emitting a stealth field. Our scanners can't get a solid fix. It's as though it's deliberately hiding its signature." Before Trask could respond, the warning alarms blared across the bridge. The sound was harsh and sudden, slicing through the silence that had fallen over the crew. The red alert light bathed the room in an ominous glow. "Captain," Rourke shouted, "they've locked onto us. Incoming fire." The sound of massive cannons firing thundered across the ship, shaking the RPS Vanguard with the force of the assault. The ship lurched violently, throwing the crew off balance as shields flared up in defense. "Damage report," Trask barked, as the ship's hull groaned in protest. Ensign Vix was the first to respond. "Shields holding for now, but we've got multiple hull breaches on the port side. Some internal systems are offline." "We've been hit," Lieutenant Rourke added, his voice strained as he worked furiously at his console. "It's not a heavy attack, but they're targeting our engines." Captain Trask's eyes narrowed as she gripped the edge of the command console. "They're not trying to destroy us. They want us to stay here. Lock down all communications. We're not giving them any data." Her mind raced as she calculated their next move. This wasn't a random attack. It was a well-coordinated strike meant to disable them long enough for someone to get on the ground and destroy the evidence of the technocracy's presence. But who? And why? "Prepare countermeasures," Trask ordered. "We're not letting them take us down without a fight." As the RPS Vanguard's weapons systems powered up, Captain Trask could feel the weight of the situation settling in. This wasn't a survey mission anymore. It was a fight for survival. The enemy was out there, just beyond the asteroid belt, watching, waiting. And it wouldn't be long before they would have to face the full wrath of the SS Scythe. End of Part 2. Skirmish that started the war. Part 3. The battle. The RPS Vanguard shook violently as another salvo from the SS Scythe slammed into the hull. Sparks arced across the bridge, and the dim lighting flickered. Captain Trask gripped the edge of the command console, her knuckles white. The Vanguard was built for exploration, not combat, and it was becoming painfully clear just how unprepared they were for a fight of this scale. "Status report," Trask demanded, her voice steely despite the chaos. "Shields down to 30%, Captain," Rourke replied, his face set in a grim expression. "Engines are operational, but we've lost maneuverability. Internal damage is spreading, and we've got a hull breach in Deck 3. "Bring us around," Trask ordered. "Get us out of their line of fire." The ship's crew scrambled to execute her commands, but the Vanguard's sluggish response betrayed its age and lack of offensive capabilities. The SS Scythe, on the other hand, moved like a shadow, its advanced technology and military design giving it an edge in this engagement. The stealth field around the enemy cruiser continued to obscure its exact position, but Trask knew enough to understand the danger. The Vanguard was sitting like a sitting duck in the middle of the asteroid belt, with little to no cover. "We've got incoming," Lieutenant Rourke started, but he didn't finish. The ship rocked again as another barrage of plasma rounds exploded against their weakening shields. "Brace for impact," Trask shouted, gripping the console once again as the crew scrambled to hold their positions. Far beyond the RPS Vanguard, Captain Varys Malin stood calmly at the helm of the SS Scythe. His orders had been clear: disable the Vanguard, eliminate any chance of it escaping or transmitting data, and keep the secret of the technocracy's outpost intact. "Lieutenant Nearus, prepare the boarding party. The Vanguard is not going to make it far with their current condition," Malin said, his tone cold as he watched the tactical feed. Nearus gave a sharp nod and tapped into the communication system. "Boarding teams ready, Captain. They'll be in position soon." "Good," Malin replied, his gaze never leaving the holographic projection of the Vanguard on the tactical display. "Once we breach their hull, we'll move quickly. Keep them distracted, but do not let them escape." Behind him, the crew of the SS Scythe continued to work with quiet efficiency. The battle was almost over. It was only a matter of time now. Back aboard the RPS Vanguard, Captain Trask's mind raced. Her ship was in trouble, bad trouble. The Scythe's first wave of fire had crippled their shields, and the second was tearing into their hull. The Vanguard could survive a few more hits, but not many. "We need to take out their stealth field," Trask muttered, thinking out loud. "Ensign Vix, how are our weapons?" Vic's voice was tight with strain. "Our forward cannons are online, but they won't do much against the Scythe's defenses. We have a limited supply of missiles, Captain. Enough for one, maybe two heavy shots." "Do it," Trask ordered. "Fire everything we've got at their last known position. Full power." "Aye, Captain," Vix responded, and the Vanguard's weapons systems hummed to life. In a last-ditch attempt to force the Scythe into the open, the Vanguard's missile launchers fired. The projectiles streaked across the void, their trails of ionized gas lighting up the starless space. For a moment there was nothing, just the cold, empty silence of space. Then the SS Scythe struck back. The return fire came from the shadows, relentless and deadly. The Scythe had waited for the Vanguard's final move, and now it launched its own barrage, hitting the Vanguard in a calculated flurry of strikes. The Vanguard's hull groaned under the pressure as secondary explosions rocked the ship. Systems were failing: life support, gravity stabilizers, communications. "We've got hull integrity down to 50%, Captain," Rourke shouted as alarms screamed across the bridge. "Prepare for boarders," Trask said, her voice barely a whisper. "Activate the internal defenses. Set the shields to maximum strength around key compartments. This is going to get worse before it gets better." In the hangar bay of the SS Scythe, the boarding party was ready. It had been years since the technocracy had used such direct tactics, disabling the enemy and then taking them by force. Malin had decided it was time to end this quietly. "Captain," Nearus said, her voice low, "we are ready to board. The crew is in position. We're waiting for your signal." "Proceed," Malin ordered. "Take the bridge, take their data cores, but leave no survivors." On the Vanguard's bridge, the crew was desperately fighting to hold their ground. The damage was severe, but they hadn't yet given up. The lights flickered in and out as more explosions ripped through the outer hull. "Captain," Rourke said, his voice tense, "I've got an enemy boarding signal. They're sending a team over." Trask's heart skipped a beat. The technocracy had anticipated this. Their attack wasn't just about crippling the Vanguard. It was about ensuring no one escaped with vital information. "Prepare the defenses," Trask barked, her eyes never leaving the tactical display. "Get every crew member to a secure position. If they want this ship, they'll have to fight for it." Her orders rang through the ship, and the remaining officers scrambled to position themselves. The last line of defense was ready. The enemy wasn't going to take them without a bloody fight. The first technocracy soldiers stormed into the Vanguard's lower decks, their black armor gleaming in the dim emergency lighting. They moved with deadly precision, cutting through the corridors in waves. The Vanguard crew fought back, but the technocracy soldiers were well trained and well equipped, and the ship's weakened defenses were no match for their assault. In the lower cargo bay, Sergeant Ilara was among the first to engage the intruders. She fired her sidearm, the loud cracks echoing through the halls as she took down one of the soldiers. But the enemy was too numerous, and she knew they couldn't hold out for long. "Captain, we're losing ground." Ilara's voice crackled over the comms. "They're everywhere." "We're not giving up yet," Trask shouted back. "Hold the line. We've got to buy time for the crew to escape." But it was clear, the RPS Vanguard was losing. The enemy boarding party had breached key sections of the ship, and the situation was rapidly deteriorating. As Trask watched the battle unfold, she knew there would be no escaping the consequences. This skirmish wasn't just a random conflict. It was a declaration of war. The technocracy had made its move, and the Back Republic would have no choice but to retaliate. The war had begun. The RPS Vanguard was moments from annihilation. The self-destruct sequence, initiated in desperation, ticked down toward zero, every second etched into the grim expressions of the crew. Captain Trask stood tall, facing the inevitable. The bridge was in chaos, lit by emergency lights and filled with the acrid scent of burning circuitry. "Captain," Lieutenant Rourke called over the blare of alarms, "we've got technocracy troops closing in on the bridge." Trask's eyes met his, full of resolve. "Hold your ground. We make every second count." The SS Scythe hovered just beyond visual range, a specter of silent power. Captain Varys Malin watched from its bridge, his brow furrowed as he considered his next move. They'd gathered enough data to destabilize the Republic, but the Vanguard's impending destruction threatened to take that data, and the opportunity it represented with it. "Captain, the Vanguard systems show imminent detonation," Lieutenant Nearus reported. "They're sacrificing the ship." Malin's jaw clenched. The technocracy valued precision. He hadn't anticipated this level of defiance. "Withdraw all boarding parties and distance us from the blast," he ordered tersely. "We'll recover what we can from the wreckage." Back on the Vanguard, explosions rocked the corridors outside the bridge as technocracy soldiers, with disciplined, calculated movements, breached the last defenses. The sounds of battle grew louder. The shouts, the blasts of gunfire, the screech of metal as bulkheads were forced open. "Captain, we're out of time." Rourke's voice cracked with urgency as the countdown hit the final seconds. "Take cover," Trask yelled, gripping the command console as she watched the numbers hit zero. A blinding flash consumed the bridge as the ship's core detonated. For an instant there was silence, total, encompassing. Then a roar of heat and energy expanded outward, disintegrating the Vanguard's hull in an explosion that scattered shrapnel and fire across the star-speckled void. Scythe. The shockwave rocked the Scythe, knocking crew members off their feet as the blast registered on their displays. "Captain, we've sustained damage to the outer hull," a junior officer reported, his voice steady despite the flickering power. "Debris field incoming." Malin remained motionless, eyes fixed on the remnants of the Vanguard. The wreckage floated, jagged and lifeless, no sign of survivors. A smoldering silence settled over the bridge of the Scythe as the realization set in. The Republic had lost one of its own, but they hadn't given the technocracy what it sought without a fight. The war wasn't just coming, it had already begun. Captain Trask's choice to destroy the Vanguard and deny the technocracy a complete victory would be remembered by her people as a symbol of defiance. For the technocracy, it was a stark reminder that their campaign would not go unchallenged. The lonely system of Trunter, once an unremarkable patch of void, had become the match that lit a galactic fire.